Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, June 26, 2018. Time to get ready for another show. In fact, time to start another show. Getting ready for another show was the task of the previous hour. Wake up. Start thinking. Start moving. Okay, what are we going to do today? It's Tuesday. Oh my gosh, it's Tuesday, and that means we don't have Greg Dworkin with us to set us straight and keep us on the straight and narrow path of talking about things that are in the news rather than talking about the things that crazy people are talking about on Twitter. But we're going to need a little bit of both today, as we usually do every day, really, honestly. Daily Co's Radio is live now. We are reminded all the way from Portland, Maine. Thank you, Bill. You keep us on the straight and narrow path. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman, tries to fill out Trump's new postcard-sized tax form. Not hard to do. I'm just going to scribble all over it and write Donald Trump in really pointy letters. Minutes later, the guys in the white coats gently usher him into their van, because it looks like I was signing an executive order, and I'm not the chief executive of the United States, so that's crazy, even if it doesn't make any particular legal sense one way or the other. What's the difference, really, between my mad scribblings and those of the supposed chief executive of the United States? All right, not much is the answer, by the way. If you haven't checked out my running Twitter thread, mostly comprised, actually, as it turns out, and you know the secret behind this, mostly comprised of headlines with photographs from The Hill. You would think I really loved The Hill as a publication. I don't. I like it as a springboard, as a straight man to my jokes. But running thread of headlines from The Hill illustrating the fact that the Trump administration has lost yet another case in court, that virtually everything that they try to do, every policy they attempt to undertake, especially those by executive order, ends up flopping, being smacked down by the courts. And I mean, I guess we're probably we're in our second dozen, I would guess, of headlines. And, you know, every administration has its ups and downs with the court, but they're almost exclusively downs for the Trump administration because they don't understand the law or how it works or care. I guess that's also a possibility. And also, it's just, it's been such an aggressive flood of them in just over a year. Well, I guess we're getting on towards a year and a half at this point. And, I mean, the losses are piling up. I wonder, it's funny, I didn't have that in front of me when I started talking about it. And I guess I'll go and look for it. And I think I wish I had put more thought into the line that I included with it. I'll have to do the Twitter search, but I think it was that I just said something like, you know, you're really good at getting stuff done or whatever, and hashtag dotard. And it was, you know, it started out as an offhand comment, just because it was on a comment on a loss before the court, in one or another of Trump's attempts to simply, you know, why don't you just-ism, just pass something, bypassing Congress and just saying, why don't we, you know, we should do this thing, and that's that, and, you know, I'm going to get it done, and I alone can make it happen, et cetera, et cetera. And then, what do you know? He wasn't able to make it work, and it's really was surprising, you know, at the time. And then I realized this happens about once a week. We find out, hey, you know, you really don't know what you're doing, and you look like an idiot. And I don't remember. Well, there was another entry in that log just recently. Yeah, I'm gonna have to find this thing. Let's see. You're really good at getting stuff done, I think. And I also had, I guess, the hashtag, right? There was the dotard hashtag, and I think I can search by that. And that ought to narrow things down. But, no, I'm still not getting my results for it. Anyway, I'll try and comb that out of the internets. I don't know why that's not working so for me, but let's see. We'll try one more time. Let's let's see, getting stuff done, I think, was it? This is an annoying way of starting the show. Let's see, and it was from me, and it had the hashtag. If this doesn't work, then I'm being systematically erased from the internet. There it is. Okay, and I think I compiled that list. I realized that we had something to it. There was something to it. I guess this was back in April 24th. Now, the latest addition to it, I have to scroll down to the end, was June 24th, and so that was over the weekend. On Sunday, you're really good at getting stuff done or whatever. It was the Hill's report, and I used almost exclusively the Hill stuff. I regret that terribly, but they're very good at the Twitters. Ex-Trump advisor saying Trump's order ending immigrant family separation policy will quickly be struck down in court. And we didn't even read that story, and we should probably read that just to see what that's all about and give a heads up on that. Mary Tyler March. Interesting. I didn't realize that's the name of the writer at The Hill who put this piece together. Mary Tyler Arch. That's difficult to do. I don't want to go there. Former Homeland Security advisor. That was interesting. Sort of like did I give that a California accent? Homeland. Former Homeland Security advisor Tom Bossert. Does anybody remember that guy? Said Sunday that he doesn't believe President Trump's executive order ending family separations will, quote, survive 3 weeks. Does anybody know if it's been 3 weeks? What I don't think so. It happened last week, right? I know it seems like a month ago, but it wasn't. And a month is longer than 3 weeks, so you get the picture. The ex-Trump administration official told ABC's This Week that the order, which Trump signed last Wednesday, runs up against the 2015 ruling from a judge who said that even detaining families together was inhumane. We should probably back up and look at the underlying law in all this. And I did share with you via the roundups, the posts, that some of the backgrounders, some of the more wonky backgrounders that are out there, and it's important to keep up with it and figure things out to try to predict, where these things are going to land, and presumably then our activism will be that much more pointed if we're ready for it. But anyway, let's find out what Tom Bossert thinks is wrong with this thing, and also try to figure out whether. You never know. It's an ex-Trump administration official. Is he disgruntled and therefore angry about things they're doing wrong that will be ineffectual because he really wanted the ability to detain families separately? Or was he angry about the family detention, family separation policy and in opposition to the Trump administration? It's difficult to tell, especially if I don't read the goddamn thing and I just grouse about it. The ex-Trump administration official told ABC's This Week that it runs up against a 2015 ruling from a judge who said even detaining families together was inhumane. This executive order the president put out to try to fix this problem is going to run headlong into the Ninth Circuit judge that decided in 2015 that even detaining parents with parents is inhumane. That would be children with parents. It doesn't actually say any word there, but that's Bossert's opinion. She called President Obama's policy of detaining children and parents together inhumane. And, okay, we should have that on the record. There is no way this executive order survives first contact because her view of President Trump will be harsher, he continued. Probably true. And probably correct. Trump signed the executive order amid intensifying backlash over his administration's zero-tolerance policy, and that's just a dumb name for it entirely. But I guess it's true, but I hate that catchphrase. The policy aims to aggressively prosecute migrants who cross the southern border into the U.S. illegally, but quickly drew fire across party lines for separating thousands of migrant families. The order allows most families to be detained together, though under current law, the federal government is barred from keeping children in immigration detention centers for more than 20 days. Republican lawmakers are reportedly preparing to vote on a narrow immigration bill, that would allow migrant children to stay in detention centers with their parents for longer than 20 days. The news comes after after the Justice Department asked a federal district court to modify the 20-day limit, known as the Flores settlement. And that was the key catchphrase that Armando mentioned the other day. I sent out, or I included in one of the afternoon posts via the Talents of Scott. And the Talents of Scott. That sounds like, I don't know what. Scott Anderson, thank you very much. And I don't know if you got a chance to read it. And I don't think, get a chance to read it. Oh, look, here, my eye has been drawn over to the sidebar here. Jack Daniels warns whiskey price will go up 10% in Europe due to tariffs. I wish it would go up here, quite honestly. It wouldn't make a big impact if the price, it would hurt teenagers, I guess, unfortunately, and they're not supposed to be drinking this stuff. There are a lot of big Jack Daniels Jack Daniels, I guess, it looks like they're taking advantage of it. They could be poised for a big retro revival. I just clicked through to the article just because I'm that distractible. Children are being imprisoned. I want to know about the Jack Daniels, but just briefly, seriously. They could, it's I don't know whether, maybe it's working for them. I think it would be a mistake for them to move into there's certain lines of small batch craft Jack Daniels. And it's going to work. And I'm sure it'll make them some money, but I wonder whether they can just be like, nope, we're just retro. And, if you're sick and tired of bearded hipsters drinking, do you have the single barrel rye version of Jack Daniels? No, just give me the old Jack Daniels, like Pabst Blue Ribbon. I think it could work. Anyway, these tariffs, I guess, will be imposed by the Europeans, and it's a question mark, I guess, how much Jack Daniels the Europeans were drinking in the first place. Perhaps more to the point would be, I guess, a discussion of what's going on with Harley Davidson and their tariffs. However, I should get back to the original subject, at least just briefly, because, again, baby jails, and we should probably keep the focus on that. But there are so many other things that we could easily be distracted by that are far more important, say, than Jack Daniels. And it's a little early to let yourself be distracted by Jack Daniels, I think. But you never know. Let's see. There are so many other stories about this. Where's I might have archived the Flores agreement explainer that I had set for and that I had shared in the roundup, but we're a little disorganized this morning, and man, there are so many stories, and I really wasn't planning on going to this one. But, perhaps I can find it and scrape it together. You know what I'll do? Here's the thing. Obviously, maybe the best play here is to share the thoughts of someone else who is organized, even if I am not. And we're talking about Paula Appanese. And Paula has been rattling off commentary. And, I mean, it's hard not to, unless, of course, it's your job to rattle off commentary each morning, in which case, if you've got scrambled eggs for brains, you'll do something like this. Let me hand it over for a few minutes anyway, just to get my head together. Thank you very much for being our crutch today, Paula, who's sharing a weekend piece, was it? Or end of the week piece from Charles Pierce that she commented. She thought it was interesting. One of, in the face of all of this, one of the most optimistic, for Charles Pierce anyway, one of the most optimistic pieces he had written in some time, and that she thought that freshness date may have passed through the weekend and into the beginning of this week. Let's find out while I dig up my organization brain.
Morning, David. On Friday, June the 22nd, Charles Pierce wrote the most optimistic piece that he has written in a really long time. And I thought it was worth reading because we all need a pep talk periodically. And Charles has been pretty darn pessimistic for a while. So the piece he wrote, he titled, "This Nation is Beginning to Realize the Full Extent of What It Did to Itself in November 2016. Subhead is, Country's Head is Clearing. The spell of the reality show presidency is wearing off. Optimism may be illusory, but it is all we have at this point, so when it stirs anywhere, it's worthy of nurture and support. Over the past week, ever since the administration's crimes against humanity along the southern border were revealed, there became an edge to the political opposition that has not been there through all the marches and the rhetoric that have attended this government since the president was inaugurated. Up until now, all of the resistance has contained a barely acknowledged undercurrent of futility. It was not that the opposition was empty, it was that it generally broke like a wave on a seawall when it collided with the immutable fact that the president's party controls every lever of political power at the federal level, as well as a great number of them out in the states, too. The week just past has changed the calculations. The images from the border and the White House's fat-headed trolling of the situation seems to have shaken up everyone in Washington to the point at which alliances are more fluid than they have been since January of 2017. There seems little doubt that the Republicans in the House of Representatives are riven with ideological chaos, struck numb by the basic conundrum of modern conservatism. When your whole political identity is defined by the proposition that government is not the solution, but rather the problem, you don't know how to operate it when fortune and gerrymandering hand you the wheel. You can fake it pretty convincingly, doing the bidding of your donor class and knuckling the powerless and making a nice living for yourself, as long as events pursue a fairly predictable course for which there are familiar precedents in your experience. You can even see the setbacks coming from around the corner. Even your defeats are predictable and thus explainable, or at least spinnable. Can't repeal Obamacare? Rhinos like John McCain. The problem arises when something unpredictable happens, and the government you control has to be fast on its feet, and you don't know how that really works. A hurricane and a flood drowns New Orleans, and the luxury horse show official you put in charge of the country's emergency management system, because who cares, right, finds that he's not really up to the job. Or suddenly you find that no matter how hot the emotions run at your rallies, or how brightly your favorite TV network polishes your apple, or how hard you pitch the snake oil that got you elected, the country will not stand for being complicit in the kidnapping and caging of children. The pictures begin to pile up. The mirror in which the country prefers to see itself cracks into a million sharp shards that begin to cut away your political life. You can feel the difference in the air. The members of the governing party, uneasy about the prospects for this year's midterms anyway, are fairly trembling at the moment, seeing in their mind's eye 130-second spots of weeping toddlers behind chain-link walls. The president has gone completely incoherent, standing firm until he doesn't, looking for help in the Congress that he will never get, and reversing himself so swiftly on his one signature issue that he's probably screwed himself up to the ankles on the floor of the Oval Office. By Friday afternoon, he was back on the electric Twitter machine, yapping about the Democrats and their phony stories of sadness and grief, and 100 Republican candidates dive back behind the couch. The country's head is clearing. The country's vision is coming back into focus, and it can see for the first time the length and breadth of the damage it has done to itself. The country is hearing the voices that the cacophony of fear and anger has drowned out for almost 3 years. The spell, such as it was, and in most places, may be wearing off at last. The hallucinatory effect of a reality show presidency is dispersing like a foul, smoky mist over a muddy battlefield. The migrant crisis is going to go down through history as one of the most destructive series of own goals in the history of American politics. The establishment of the zero-tolerance policy made the child nabbing inevitable. The president's own rhetoric, indeed the raison d'etre of his entire campaign, trapped him into at first defending the indefensible and then abandoning was perhaps the only consistent policy idea he ever had, outside of enriching himself and his family, that is. Then the cameras began to roll and the nation's gorge began to rise, and the president couldn't stand the pressure that was mounting around him. Of course, because he knows nothing about anything, including how to actually be president, he bungled even his own abject surrender. He spent the days since signing his executive order railing against what he felt compelled to do and arguing against himself and losing anyway. That's the optimism, and it may in fact be illusory, but the power balance in our politics seemed to shift this week. Terrible policies are still coming from the various agencies. Scott Pruitt remains a grifter of nearly inhuman proportions, and a vandal besides. Neil Gorsuch continues to prove himself to be the reliable conservative hack for whom the Republicans stole a Supreme Court seat. But the crisis at the border is a leg-hold trap for all of them. There is no way for them to keep faith with themselves and get out from under the humanitarian disaster they concocted. One day, maybe brave Guatemalan mothers and their very brave children may be said to have saved the American Republic from slow motion and giddy suicide. Some even may be our fellow citizens by then, and we should remember to thank them. He ends there. Well, I hope he's right. I hope that things have shifted. It feels like that to me, but again, as he says, it may be illusory. This is Friday. By Monday, Tuesday, God knows what will have happened. But maybe, just maybe, there's some light on that horizon finally. Thanks for listening. This is Paula from PaulaRider.com.
Well, what do you think? Do you think it is? It's lasted? That moment has lasted? I think it's certainly arguable by now, by Tuesday. Not so much that the issue is gone, but certainly that the ground has shifted underneath it. And here, I guess you could view this as giving some credence to the topic police, who insist that, well, if we're talking about the red hen, then we're distracted from the real issue. And it certainly would be the case if that was all we were talking about. Though it did get very nearly like it was all we were talking about. And easy to see how that could happen because, take a relatively small, certainly a small scale issue and relatively simple issue, and Democrats will parse it 18 different ways, and everybody has to have their take published, and I can understand that, and we certainly spent plenty of time, too much time, discussing it and the ramifications and ridiculousness of being, of having it analyzed for us 15 different ways as well, even as we analyzed it a 16th and 17th way. And it does feel like the story is beginning to fall off, if not fall off the map, then perhaps the intensity is shifting. However, I will remind you that, and maybe this was some real foresight, it may have just been that we just can't make the logistics of a protest come together any faster than this, but isn't the big protest that's slated for this issue, slated in fact for the 30th, in other words, this weekend. So we have the remaining weekdays to turn the heat back up again, and of course you don't even really, there really shouldn't be that much to do in terms of facts on the ground for turning the heat up. Everyone's still in jail. Babies are still imprisoned. The executive order perhaps was never designed to really do anything, and we have seen through mostly, the reporters who are responsible for, or I guess I shouldn't even lay it at the feet of the reporters necessarily, but the people who are responsible for populating the content of our news websites have fallen for the first round, but we all saw through it, and so maybe it's not such a bad thing that we all observe it in our own ways. We've seen through the first round of attempted propaganda on the executive order that the Border Patrol announced breathlessly that they were going to be releasing all of the minors in detention, in their custody. And, that was supposed to be reported as the headline. The Border Patrol is going to reunite all the families for any children they have in custody. But, that sounds better than it really is, because very few people were in Border Patrol custody in all of this. And this is where understanding the nuance, I guess, comes in, and you're able to see through these things. And I think it was done very successfully by most readers, even if they were reading misleading headlines. They knew by that point, because they had educated themselves, and they had educated themselves here thanks to the work of reporters who had, in fact, managed to convince the content managers to allow this educational information to get through so that people knew, or at least, active consumers of the news knew, that it isn't the Border Patrol that's keeping these people in custody. It is very often, occasionally it's other branches of the Homeland Security Department, but in bulk it is, as we said, they're turned over to the custody of Health and Human Services and their various and sundry bureaus all over the country. So the vast majority of people that we were worried about were not in Border Patrol custody in the first place, but it's a perfectly honest, asterisk, headline to say, well, we're releasing everybody in our custody. I mean, if we had found out, for instance, that the Girl Scouts were going to release all the families in their custody, we would cheer this as a good thing because nobody should be in Girl Scout custody. Not that you'd be better off in Boy Scout custody, but because the Girl Scouts have no business keeping people in custody. It's not a gender thing. The Boy Scouts shouldn't do it either, just to be clear. But, yeah, I mean, we were supposed to be busy celebrating the headlines, and thankfully people did not do that. So that's good news. I guess that brings me back to the original topic, which I'll save for the other side of our first break, even though I now see 10 other directions to go in. But bringing you up to speed on the Flores agreement, and we'll see if I can't get a good background out of this too. Darrell Lind and Dylan Scott put this together for Vox some days ago, and if it was put together for Vox, why then it will have been explained to you, and you will have no excuse for not understanding it. But we ought to go over it because, that's what the original prediction and what Tom Bossert, that story we were reading at the beginning of the show, was all about. And the clock will be ticking down on that 3-week mark, and one, we can check that prediction. And two, if and when it comes true, if we read through this and come to understand it, we'll be able to say we understood it, saw it coming, and will hopefully then be able to see through the second or third or fourth round, whatever round we're on by that point, of propaganda and spin from the administration aimed at convincing us that the whole thing is over before the protest gets underway, the organized protest. National. I've screwed it up. I was going to say nationwide, and then I tried to say national instead. And instead, we made it national, and no one knows what that means. But the big, large-scale, national-scale protest slated for the 30th, we'll try and read up on that, too, so you can find out about how you can join it and express your own opposition to the baby jails. But you can do so and argue the law if you're ever confronted on the street as well. That's the value of the show. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring, monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Once again, trying to just get my head around all the things that we could and should be doing here, but delivering on the promise of the Vox explainer on the Flores Agreement, in case you didn't get a chance to read it. I feel like we will be using our time well if we take a peek at this. The basic idea here, before we even get into the explainer, that Trump's executive order, we realized right away, and again, I think a lot of active readers of the news, if not necessarily activist people, I think we overlap a little bit, but active readers of the news, I think, saw right away. Well, there were two sorts, I guess, of right away observations. There was the people who said, let us read the text. Then there were the people who said, let us read the text, and we believe that this is the text that's being passed on to the people who are supposed to execute this policy on the ground. We think they're the same texts. And let us read the text and analyze what we think. What do we think? How do we think this will be interpreted by the actors on the ground? Or how do we think they'll be directed to interpret what it means? And the executive order very quickly fell apart on those grounds. It's vague. It is contradictory. It doesn't give any particular direction. It's mostly railing about I hate Democrats and other people. And appears to give no clear direction to anyone what to do, given the fact that this Flores agreement exists, and that's problematic. And as Armando was able to point out to us very quickly, the text of the executive order doesn't appear to have any actionable directions in it that don't assume a modification of the Flores Agreement, and he explained to us that he thought that was very unlikely that they were going to get that. And then I did see and pass along via the Twitter machine, that we didn't discuss it here on the air, that very shortly thereafter the government did in fact file pleadings somewhere seeking to modify that Flores Agreement. So at least we had gotten it correctly pinpointed. Armando had told us, warned us properly, that this executive order couldn't mean anything unless there was a modification, that they were very unlikely to get the modification. But then we were prepared when we saw that the government did in fact move for modification. I don't know if I bookmarked that or not, or put it away in Pocket. Certainly did retweet it, but that would have been, probably end of last week, and very little chance that I'll be able to come up with that story if it's not buried in Pocket somewhere. But the Flores Agreement itself, what is it all about? Here's the Vox explainer. Flores Agreement, Trump's executive order to end family separation, might run afoul of a 1997 court ruling. Getting rid of the requirement to let kids out of immigration custody quickly will take more than the stroke of a pen. Let's find out why. The solution to the crisis of family separation at the U.S.-Mexico border, and presumably they would separate your family if you came in over the northern border as well, and indeed they have detained people who have inadvertently crossed over their northern border. Another story lies out that way. The Trump administration has decided their solution is to get rid of a 1997 federal court decision that strictly limits the government's ability to keep children in immigration detention. The administration has fingered Flores versus Reno, or the Flores settlement, as the reason it is, quote, forced to separate parents from their children to prosecute them. It claims that because it cannot keep parents and children in immigration detention together, it has no choice but to detain parents in immigration detention after they've been criminally prosecuted for illegal entry and send the children to the Department of Health and Human Services as, quote, unaccompanied alien children. They're unaccompanied now because we have arrested their parents, and we have no intention of either releasing them in any way or reuniting them. They are therefore now unaccompanied, though they didn't come here that way, and they fall into a class that we are permitted by law to treat this way. And I guess if you lock kids up in enough baby jails, eventually, separate from their parents, eventually you can get them all classified that way and do with them as you will. And, I'm sure that was not a good situation before, but when you take a serial child molester like Donald Trump and put him in charge, and he also doesn't care about how law works, and he's a racist, I guess you're not going to get a good outcome. The Flores settlement requires the federal government to do two things. One, to place children with a close relative or family friend, quote, without unnecessary delay, unquote, rather than keeping them in custody, and two, to keep immigrant children who are in custody in the, quote, least restrictive conditions possible. Well, that doesn't really, help us understand why baby jails are the way to comply, does it? Republicans in Congress have proposed legislation that would overrule Flores and allow children to be kept with their parents in immigration and customs enforcement custody while they are put through criminal prosecution and deportation proceedings, which many migrant families fight by claiming asylum in the U.S., a process that can stretch out for months or years. And here's where it starts to get really complicated, and it looks like, sides are flip-flopping, switching direction, what have you. It is, it's initially, I think, difficult to understand if you come to the story late like I do. Initially, you mean Republicans in Congress are actually pushing to overrule this so that the families can be kept together? Well, in a way, they want them to be kept together so that they can be deported together very quickly. And I suppose that's preferable to the situation in which the parents are deported quickly and the children stay here in baby jail, which is what we're getting, which may or may not have been what Republicans in Congress contemplated earlier before the crisis really exploded into the headlines. I don't know. But what they ended up getting was, yes, deporting parents and retaining the children for whatever reason or purpose. That's what we ended up getting. And presumably at least some Republicans are uncomfortable with that. Some are uncomfortable because we shouldn't be separating families, and some are uncomfortable because we're paying for the custody of the children, and some are uncomfortable because we didn't, grind the children up into sausage or deport them or some combination thereof. We have some real radicals out there in Congress. Anyway, Trump can't overrule the Flores settlement with the stroke of a pen, but getting rid of the court agreement has been in his administration's sights for months. While Republicans frame Flores as the obstacle to keeping families together, many of the people outraged over family separation might not be too happy with a world without Flores either. And that's where it starts to get complicated. Remember that there are more than just Republicans in Congress. There are also Democrats, and there are more than just Republicans in the world. And the Flores agreement is probably not particularly popular with anybody on any side of immigration. Republicans were probably okay. I don't know whether they were ever okay with it necessarily, but I don't know. There are certainly some Republicans who were happy to see that family separation was being taken to the extreme this way, and it's pretty clear from reports that the president and his cabinet enjoyed the idea of family separation and using it as supposedly as a deterrent to illegal immigration, which it never really was and was never supposed to be. And of course, then we conflated it with the issue of asylum seekers. And that's a very different class of people, though we are encouraged by the coverage and Republican spin to think of them as the same class of people. And in some cases, I suppose, this is where the seed of truth sometimes exists for the Republican spin. Surely there are some people who arrive for a mixed set of reasons, and those reasons may be partially to seek asylum because the life they were subjected to in their home country was in fact dangerous and deadly, and they needed to leave for their own safety, and also probably had some, maybe they had some economic anxiety, which is a real cause célèbre here in the United States. It will get you interviewed in your bars and diners for months if you have enough of it, unless you got it in Guatemala, in which case we don't care anymore because only the economics of the United States matter to us. We're a little bit ethnocentric that way, plus also brown, so you obviously don't have the capacity to understand macroeconomics the way Buzz does there in the diner. So anyway, we do confuse the two, and some people confuse the issue for us intentionally and say, well, I'm here really here because of my economic anxiety. But I heard that if I make a claim for asylum, I will be perhaps treated and processed differently. And I mean, I'm sure that's always been the case, that if somebody, that's the case with everything. If somebody decides to make a claim that isn't entirely true, it's going to take some time to adjudicate that claim. And we find that to be the case, 17 times a day for the President of the United States, though the adjudication is not legal due process, but rather press vetting. But it still takes us, the the American press 2 days to come to the conclusion that an outright lie is a misstatement or something of the sort. And so you can see that if there's real legal issues in the balance and an actual legal process, it can drag out for months. And I'm sure that there are also some people who just know that the process drags out, and so the plea for asylum ought to be made just as a delaying tactic. No different in that sense from, say, Republicans putting a hold on all of Obama's judges and, say, delaying for a year in the seating of Merrick Garland such that Neil Gorsuch can steal the seat instead, right? But, again, brown people making the same play, that can't happen. Back to the explainer. Trump can't overrule it with a stroke of a pen, right? And Republicans frame Flores as the obstacle to keeping families together. Many people outraged over family separation also might not be very happy in a world without Flores. The Flores settlement dates back to mistreatment of unaccompanied minors in the 1980s. Wow, who could have been in charge in the 1980s to mistreat unaccompanied minors? The Flores settlement, now at the center of the family separation crisis, has a 30-year history. It's 30 years already, geez. Back in the 1980s, several lawsuits were filed over the treatment of unaccompanied minors who were in the care of the U.S. government. One was filed by the American Civil Liberties Union in 1985 on behalf of Jenny Lisette Flores, a 15-year-old from El Salvador. She had fled her home country to find an aunt who was living in the United States. Aunt is not my preferred pronunciation of the word, but I figured most of you would understand that better if I said that rather than aunt, which is my own pronunciation of it from up in New Jersey days. Anyway, she was detained by federal authorities at the U.S. border, as frequently is the case. What was she doing fleeing from El Salvador in 1980, 1985? Wonder what could have been going on there and whose fault that was. Flores and other minors in federal custody sometimes had to share sleeping quarters and bathrooms with unrelated adult men and women. That's going to be a dangerous situation, I'm sure. Flores was strip searched regularly, equally dangerous probably, and she was told that she could only be released to her parents, not her aunt. That's difficult for me to say. The ACLU asserted in its lawsuit that Flores and other unaccompanied children had a constitutional right to be released to responsible adults, as the Marquette Law Review documented in a review of the Flores settlement's history. And that is herein linked if you really want to dive into the history of the settlement. And that's interesting. That's also part of the heart of the street argument, the street-level argument about immigration. Hot argument, talking point for the deplorable right is that there is no such thing as constitutional rights for non-citizens. That's a matter of, like, black letter, well, not black letter law, I guess, because I don't know if there's actually been legislation anywhere that declares it to be the case, but it is settled law with respect to precedent in this country that no, it is not the case that if you are not a citizen of the United States, there are no instances in which the United States Constitution's protections apply to you. There are very many situations in which they apply to you, including, for our purposes right here, right now, due process. There's no reason to believe, unless you're, a backwards rube who just wants to believe it so that you can screw people over, that the requirement that our government provide due process in the way they conduct their affairs, all of their affairs, really, the government, all of its affairs, the government's affairs, require an adherence to due process. It doesn't mean you get to cheat and cut corners and have no process because some or even all of the impact of your actions, which avoid due process, fall upon someone who is not a citizen of the United States. And it's not even hard to figure out why. If they weren't a citizen of the United States, but they were legally in this country, would they be entitled to due process if they were arrested for some crime? And the answer is yes. Would they be entitled to due process if they were arrested in this country and they were illegally in this country? And the answer always has been yes, but I think most, your basic Archie Bunker on the street thinks the answer is no. How can you tell? Because they're illegal. That's their favorite term for it. And, of course, that doesn't make any goddamn sense whatsoever, because even they know that all sorts of people, citizens or otherwise, who commit crimes are not executed for those crimes on the street, generally speaking. Well, some of the black perpetrators of those crimes probably are, and some of those who are just merely black and on the street and haven't perpetrated a crime, but look to police like someone who might be thinking about it, have also been executed on the street. But that, again, is a somewhat different story. Ordinarily, we know that it's not the case, and of course when you are arrested, even if you're arrested for being an illegal alien, they will tell you that you are under arrest and that you have your Miranda rights, and even if you don't think you do, or people who observe your arrest don't think you do or don't think you should, you still do. It's just, it's a matter of law so basic and so widely understood and so widely accepted that it becomes a difficult point to argue with people on the street. It just is that way. Well, show me in the Constitution where it says that. Well, it doesn't say that in the Constitution, but neither does it say you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you, etc. It doesn't say any of that in the Constitution. It implies it. And we were able to tease that out of the Constitution by looking at it sideways and figuring out what did they actually mean by this and how can we apply these rules to a modern day situation. But because, Archie Bunker has seen this happen on television, he has come to accept that those are, in fact, constitutional rights. So, okay. I ask them whether that applies to somebody who's been arrested here for illegal entry into the United States. The fact that we don't just punch them in the face and throw them in the river, although I'm sure Archie would like to do that, the fact that we don't do that is evidence that we believe top to bottom in the government, or we used to before the Trump administration, that there is a process that is due here. And even in the case where the people being arrested and processed are deemed to have entered the country illegally, the reason we say they don't enter the country, immorally and are subject to instant death, but rather that they entered illegally, is it implies that there is now a legal process by which we'll get rid of them, a process to which, or a process that is due to them. We owe it to them when we process them through this process, and to do it the correct way. Anyway, back to our explainer here. The case went through several federal courts before reaching the Supreme Court in 1993. From 1985 all the way to 1993, finally in the Supreme Court. And the High Court mostly sided with the government. Surprise. But the real consequence was a consent decree, as they call it, agreed to by the Clinton administration. The Clinton administration had to be the one to clean this up, right? But just by way of pointing that out, right? The suit is filed in 1985 under the Reagan administration. Again, just question mark. How does someone who's 15 years old from El Salvador find that they need to flee their country and come to the United States? And the answer is the same, Ronald Reagan. But here we are in 1993. This has to get finally cleaned up, and that is handed over to the Clinton administration. You have the responsibility for inheriting and cleaning up the mess of the Reagan and Bush administrations. But okay, fine, we can handle it. We understand that people have protections and rights under the Constitution, even if they came from El Salvador. So, in 1993, the High Court sided mostly with the government. The real consequences was this consent decree entered into by the Clinton administration and the plaintiffs in the litigation in 1997, 4 years after that. The decree, known as the Flores Settlement, set standards for unaccompanied minors who were in the custody of federal authorities. The agreement required that children be released as soon as possible, either to their parents, a legal guardian, another relative, or a vetted entity willing to take legal custody of the child. And I suppose that's the door we've kicked wide open here. According to a summary from the Congressional Research Service, the order also required those minors who would be kept in federal custody be placed in the least restrictive conditions possible and be provided with some basic necessities like food and water. That is pretty basic. Access to medical treatment, access to running water, and that they be separated from adults to whom they had no relation. Okay. Over the years, however, immigration authorities were not fully complying with the Flores settlement. Imagine that. Congress passed laws in the 2000s that would eventually require the Department of Homeland Security to put unaccompanied children in the care of the Office of Refugee Resettlement within the Health and Human Services Department, and that's where we stand now. Okay. Under the Flores rules, and I guess that was the seed of truth that people like Trump were clinging to. Well, there's a law, and this terrible Democrat law, and Congress passed. We don't know. I'm not certain when in the 2000s, and I guess it's because there are several laws. Congress passed laws in the 2000s that would eventually require DHS, which I guess that's about when it was established too, to put unaccompanied children in the care of the Office of Refugee Resettlement within the Health and Human Services Department. I guess, like I said, that's where we now stand. And they blame that on Democrats, even though I guess it should also be pointed out that during the bulk of the 2000s, it's not entirely clear when, but for the bulk of it, Republicans controlled at least the House, and so therefore much of, not always the Senate, it flipped back and forth once or twice, but good chance that they were passed by Republicans if they were passed in that time frame too. Under the current Flores rules, children, quote, accompanied by parents have to be released within 20 days. So I guess if you turn them into children who are unaccompanied by parents, then you get around the 20-day thing. Over the past couple of decades, the principles undergirding Flores evolved into specific rules, as will happen when you have to execute these agreements in practice. So they evolved into specific rules about exactly how long and under what conditions children can be held. But they generally applied only to children who had entered the U.S. as unaccompanied minors, not those who arrived with their parents. Here's where things begin to change. In 2014, however, the Obama administration, yes, attempted to tamp down on the number of Central American families seeking asylum in the U.S. by keeping families in detention and processing and deporting them as quickly as possible. There was a lot of objection to it at the time, this despite the fact that Republicans, alt-right, weirdos, deplorables, and left-leaning folks as well, who we consider allies in some other instances, complain that there were no such complaints. But there were. Now, sometimes they were the ones making the complaint, and they thought they were the only ones, but there were such complaints. And people did frequently point out, though it never exploded into the public consciousness the way this story has, people did point out with great consistency that the Obama administration was deporting many families, and perhaps at record pace. I should also point out, of course, it is also true that it was sometimes pointed to with great pride by Obama partisans who were, this is very interesting, I think, in light of the arguments of the last couple of days, and by this I mean the last 2 to 3 days, really. It was sometimes a point of pride, if that's not exactly the correct word, but it was pointed to by supporters of the Obama administration as evidence that Obama was tough on immigration, I think the idea of which was supposed to call off the Republican dogs somehow from attacking the Obama administration and its supporters for being weak on immigration. And guess what? It didn't work. Nobody bought it. Nobody cared. The fact that the Obama administration was deporting more Central American families, whether they sought refugee or a status, asylum, what have you, or not, that was supposed to be like, by the way, that's supposed to be the civility. That was supposed to be the moderating factor that was supposed to work to deflect criticism. It didn't, and it didn't matter because the criticism was going to come whether it was true or not, and it was going to come for partisan political reasons, and yet the sages who were unable to protect the Obama administration and Democrats in general from criticism on immigration continue to hold megaphones with which they are insisting that we all need to, of course, maintain our standards of civility and not rock the boat too much so that they can remain in charge and continue to give away the game in the hopes that Republicans will leave us alone and go away. And it just doesn't seem to be happening. And even if it did, the Republicans who might have considered that as an option have been forced to renege on that and have instead joined the chorus, blaming the whole thing on Democrats. So great job. And you will not be consulting for me, and that's okay. I don't need to listen to your advice. That's the good news. Anyway, as we said, in October, I'm assigning timeline to it that doesn't exist. In 2014, that's where we left off. The Obama administration attempted to tamp down on a number of Central American families seeking asylum by keeping families in detention and processing and deporting them as quickly as possible. Immigration advocates challenged the policy of family detention under Flores, properly so, and judges agreed with them, and I guess properly so in that case too, in large part because it said that the Obama administration was out of bounds in detaining migrant families for the purposes of deterrence. Oh my. So I guess at some point the Obama administration likewise said that it could be used as or considered as a deterrent. And guess what? The court said, no, it can't. It's wrong. As NBC's Benji Sarlin has pointed out, that's why certain Trump administration officials have been careful to say, not to say rather, that family separation is a deterrent or even a policy now. However, that was all blown up by the president saying that it was a deterrent. And the chief of staff, who used to be the head of the Homeland Security Department, saying it was a deterrent. They cannot keep their traps shut. Problem. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, late re-entry into the show, but carrying on with the Vox explainer of the Flores Agreement and the history, the brief history behind it. We left off with noting, of course, that yes, the Obama administration at one point actually thought that it would be okay to keep families together for holding, so long as they were being processed and deported quickly, and that it would be, let's see, where were we? Immigration advocates challenged the policy of family detention under Flores, in large part because it said the Obama administration was out of bounds in detaining migrant families for the purpose of deterrence. And yet, for whatever reason, that didn't sink into the mind of Donald Trump and his cronies because they weren't paying any attention, I'm sure, at the time, to the intricacies of government policy, much less to the intricacies of Ninth Circuit Court rulings on those policies, and arrived with the idea in mind that why don't you just-ism was the proper approach to governance. And we're likely shocked to find, if they ever did find it, if anybody ever did tell them, no, there's a whole history here that actually tells you what to say and what not to say, and it's right here. Do not congratulate and do not say deterrence. And so, of course, they immediately said, congratulations, deterrence, and got it all wrong. Ultimately, the Ninth Circuit ruled that the Flores settlement covered not just unaccompanied alien children, but accompanied ones as well, because why not? What's the difference? It set a general standard that the government couldn't hold them in custody for more than 20 days. The Ninth Circuit stopped short of saying that parents could be released under Flores, but the federal government hasn't responded to Flores by keeping families together for a few weeks and then splitting them apart. Instead, it's made a practice, for the most part, of releasing the whole family after 20 days. Since the current family detention facilities 2 in Texas created under Obama, and an older one in Pennsylvania are mostly full. They don't have a ton of space for detaining families anyway. This is one example of what the Trump administration calls catch and release. And, I suppose that's supposed to tickle the funny bones of his hunting, trapping, fishing base, I guess. Catch and release, which is, by the way, generally speaking, in fishing, considered to be a good thing, even if they think it's like wimpy for whatever reason, and even if I don't eat the fish, who cares? But what else are you going to do here? Again, see, and I guess this is perhaps a basic difference between the way Republicans and Democrats, or left and right, or however you want to frame it, approach the issue. And that is to say, okay, it can be illegal to enter the country in a certain way, but what are you going to do about it? Essentially, is the first question. Of course, it's catch and release. If you really and truly, for whatever reason, don't want this person in the country, whether you never, as Republican, as with the case of the Republicans never wanted the person in the country regardless, because they don't want the person in the country because they are Central American or brown, or no matter where they come from, they're different and we don't want them unless they're very, very white. And even Norwegians are different from us, by the way, but somehow they will learn to live with the Norwegians. Anyway, they don't want any given immigrant in the country, period, because they hate people from other countries, and that's the crime here. Some others are willing to bend a little bit, but say, well, if they enter the country illegally, that's an illegal thing, and we don't want people who would do illegal things to be in this country, even though we do illegal things all the time. We just happen to have been born here. That's somehow substantially different to these folks. I don't know why, but it is. And it's unreasonable, and one day we hope we can purge them of that feeling, but I doubt it. And the illegality of the method of entry becomes the excuse for treating them as criminals and therefore as undesirables, mostly because even among the deplorables, a lot of people are unwilling to say it's because you come from this country, or it's because you don't come from this country, or it's your skin color. No, it's the illegal entry. So suppose you arrest somebody for entering the country illegally. Well, I hate catch and release. And if you deport them / release them back into, across the border, as far as you're willing to take them, which I guess the answer would be Mexico if you're just really lazy, and bust them across the border and dump them there. Well, then they just turn right around and come back in because we didn't punish them enough the first time. So we should be putting people in jail and keeping them in prison for the crime of entering the country illegally. After all, it's illegal. And these guys think this makes a tremendous amount of sense. Of course, about 4 seconds of thought on the problem will reveal what the issue is. I don't want them in the country, no matter what. All right. So I'll put them back out of the country. But then they'll just turn around and come right back in. They might, but what else can we do? We kick them out of the country. That's what you asked us to do. Yeah, but I want them to be punished. Well, how? Like branding or something? Well, no. Maybe yes, but I'm unwilling to say so. Put them in jail. They've done something illegal. Put them in jail. Put them in jail where? Well, we're out of space. Big deal. So what? Private prisons, a booming business. Let's use those. I know, but no, where? Like, what is the geographic location of this jail going to be? Well, we got all kinds of room in rural Texas, and we'll build these warehouses, and we can warehouse them there. Yeah, but that is in the United States, yes? Yeah. Well, so then the person that you wanted to kick out of the United States is in the United States. Well, I know, but we're keeping them in jail. Yeah. And then they begin to see what you're saying. Oh, well, let them serve their time, and then we'll throw them out into Mexico. But you said, what happens when we throw them out into Mexico. They try to come back in. Well, yeah, but now they know they'll go to jail, so it'll be a deterrent. But they're leaving places where jail is, our version of jail even, is better than what they were leaving. honestly, work this problem through. You can't catch people and hold them for the crime of illegally entering the country in the country. That doesn't make any sense. I don't know, and I guess that's why instead we have border militias that say, well, we will kill them on the border, and I'm sure that as sovereign citizen type mindset says, well, if we shoot them while they're still in the river, it's not murder because it happened in Mexico. Murder is illegal in Mexico too. They're not doing a very good job of prosecuting murders necessarily in Mexico. But that doesn't make it legal. You can't. But in these guys' minds, they're figuring, I'm a U.S. citizen. If I shoot a Mexican, even if they're not Mexican, crossing the border and they're right on the dotted line, which doesn't exist, then neither country can prosecute me because reasons. Okay, sure. No, that's not the way that works either. Thankfully, there aren't that many idiots working under that assumption. But yeah, that's the basic problem. What do you do with people you catch who've entered the country illegally? If you don't want them in the country, and there's a pretty good reason, not pretty good. There's a stupid reason not to, right? You can say, well, the cost of incarcerating them here. Okay. That's not supposed to be your chief worry about everything. But if you're that kind of person, presumably you will respond to being told how much it costs to keep a person in custody here. I thought you didn't want them in here using up our resources. And now here they are at your insistence here, quote, using up our resources. Well, something. And they are angry about that. And they somehow think, maybe there's some way we could make them pay for their imprisonment or something. I'm sure that's been floated. But, if people were sitting on a pile of money, they probably wouldn't be in as much trouble in their home countries as they are. And sometimes they actually did end up sitting on a small pile of cash. They just had to pay it to traffickers to truck them up either across the border or close enough for them to cross on their own. But that's the inherent contradiction here is they want to both kick them out of the country and keep them in the country. And guess what? That's going to be awfully difficult to satisfy, even if you take Paul Begala's civility advice. It's not going to work. We're in a situation where the people you are supposedly arguing with, having a civil argument with, they're unsatisfiable, and so the argument's going to break down, and they're eventually going to be uncivil to you because they've got an untenable position, but you're not allowed to be uncivil back to them because reasons, I guess. We're supposed to fight it out at the ballot box, where, by the way, we're at a distinct disadvantage thanks to, among other things, decisions like that handed down from the Supreme Court yesterday that came down the way it did because they stole a Supreme Court seat in order to be able to steal this case and maintain an institutionalized permanent electoral advantage, yada, yada. Again, another story. Okay, so where were we? The Trump administration has always seen ending Flores as a solution, and that in quotes there, to the administration, and that should be in quotes too, the extra legal protections, not extra legal, but the additional legal protections against indefinite detention of asylum seekers, and much stricter protections under the Flores settlement against indefinite detention of children and families are nothing but legal loopholes. And I guess that's the settlement they eventually arrived at in their conflicted minds. Well, if you can't kick them out of the country only to have them try to get back in again because that's catch and release, and you can't detain people in this country because due process, yada, yada, well, then maybe we'll come up with a reason why we should evade due process and just hold them in legal limbo and then detain them indefinitely, like we've been doing with suspected terrorists and military tribunals in Guantanamo, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe that's their solution that they were trying to get to at the end, because, even if you detain people indefinitely because you take them outside the legal system and you do that and you're glad to do it because you hate them, you're still keeping them here and paying for them here. And perhaps ultimately there are probably plenty of deplorables who just say, keep them in the, why don't we keep them in the camps and starve them to death? Because, P.S., stop calling me Nazis. We don't want to pay for their food and just pick up the tab and have them use up our resources again. And maybe they're thinking, maybe the more moderate of them are saying, well, why don't we put them in Guantanamo, which is a legal limbo, and we can hold them there, and then they're still not, quote, in this country. And if we starve them to death down there, that'll work too. We know that'll work, not only because starving people to death works and it kills them, and that solves the problem, but because it's happening on an island, no one will notice, because proof of the concept here, Puerto Rico. It's an island and nobody cares. The end. That's probably what, if they're putting these pieces together at all, that's unfortunately what they're probably thinking about. And they're probably right. And it's awful. So where were we? To the administration, the extra legal protections against indefinite detention of asylum seekers and much stricter protections under the Flores settlement against indefinite detention of children and families are nothing but legal loopholes. The administration would prefer to be able to detain all immigrants who enter the U.S. without papers until their cases are resolved. And by the way, even if you enter the U.S. with papers, because you say you're seeking asylum and fill out those papers, too bad. We don't believe you anymore. They would rather detain all immigrants who enter the U.S. without, going through their preferred process until their cases are resolved, and preferably resolve those cases as quickly as possible with deportation orders. I guess that's the more specific disagreement. If you can't hold them for more than 20 days and you release them, they're just going to try and enter the country again, because why not? No skin off their nose. All that happened to them last time was a 20-day timeout, and they got water during that 20 days. And so, come on, what a huge incentive to try again. Free water. They instead would rather say, you might as well keep them incarcerated until we decide under due process to kick people out. Keeping families together in immigration detention really would suit the government's interests. It's more expensive to keep the parents in detention while children are under HHS care or placed with sponsors or fosters than to keep both in one detention facility. I guess I could see that. And legally, the government would be allowed to treat the family as one case, with one shot to enter the U.S. rather than two separate cases as parent and child. That makes good sense. Attorney General Jeff Sessions' efforts to change asylum policy are intended to keep many immigrants fleeing gang violence from passing their initial asylum screenings, thus allowing the government to deport the whole family together quickly rather than allowing the child to enter the U.S. to pursue a full court case. However, the implementation of Sessions' changes, at least for the moment, doesn't appear to be as radical as was initially feared. And that's linked. We could perhaps examine that in a separate session here at the Vox Explainer Law School. The question is how to do it. In theory, well, we'll discuss it a little bit, I guess, Flores could be superseded at any time by DHS regulations. That is, they could change the rules of the game on the ground, and you might have to do Flores all over again. That's a possibility. It wasn't supposed to be a de facto law, just a framework to keep in place while the government came up with permanent rules to ensure migrant kids were adequately protected. Of course, what counted as adequately would be up to the court. Or Congress could pass a bill that made it clear that children are allowed to be kept in Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, facilities, just like adults are, wiping away the Flores settlement. It just can't be done by executive order, is their point. At first, Trump's DHS was reportedly considering trying to go the regulatory route. According to the Washington Post in an April article, the proposed regulations would codify the government's ability to separate families, but would also open the door to longer stays for families detained together. The proposal also attempts, here quoting from the Washington Post, the proposal also attempts to address a restriction on how long migrant children and their parents can be held at the family residential facilities. That's a nice name for it. Judges have ruled that their stays must be limited to 20 days or less, in part because the centers are not state licensed. Interesting. The proposed regulations would allow federal licensing of such facilities, which could open the door for longer stays. Ooh, extended stay. That's nice. The draft says the administration currently holds families for an average of 14 days and is examining cost estimates that would expand that to an average of 45 days. And there ends the quote from the Washington Post. But issuing regulations is a months-long process, and President Trump doesn't have time for these things. Instead, he plunged ahead with the zero-tolerance prosecution policy, making the separation of families a widespread occurrence and prompting a groundswell of opposition that appears to be getting stronger by the day, though whether it's still getting stronger by the day is perhaps questionable. It's not at all clear that Trump can legally issue an executive order that would override the Flores settlement. That's why analysts are assuming that any order Trump issues to keep families together in DHS custody will be challenged by a lawsuit and may get thwarted. If DHS somehow manages to craft an executive order that evades the issue, or if Congress passes any of the suite of Republican bills that purport to end family separation by expanding family detention, it will mean one of two things. Either the Trump administration will start keeping families in detention for as long as it takes to fully adjudicate their asylum cases, which can take months or years, or it will need to ram them through an, quote, expedited legal process, get rid of due process, to minimize their time in detention. President Obama himself tried the latter in 2014, and it went horrifically. There is a link herein, but we'll move on with the text here. Pro bono lawyers who went to family detention centers, which were flung together in a matter of weeks, see, it does happen, reported that it was all but impossible for families to get due process for their asylum claims. The former, that would be, keeping families in detention for as long as it takes to fully adjudicate their asylum cases, that is what families are still going through at the Pennsylvania facility. The long-term detention of immigrant children raises some of the same concerns that keeping them in custody without their parents does in terms of long-term trauma. Bright lights in the Berks facility, Pennsylvania, reportedly keep children from sleeping well, for example, and they can be disciplined if they try to climb into a parent's bed for comfort. Furthermore, getting rid of the Flores settlement entirely wouldn't just get rid of the mandate to release the children, it would also get rid of the requirements for what the conditions children must be held in. In other words, the legal standards that undergird the Office of Refugee Resettlement Facilities, standards that Trump administration officials brag are among the highest in the world, would be wiped away. Depending on what replaced Flores, it's possible ICE could simply use existing adult detention facilities to herd children into as well. The Trump administration could hold itself to higher standards, but for that matter, it could also find an alternative for detaining immigrant families that still allowed the government to ensure they showed up in court. It just doesn't appear inclined to do so. So that clears everything up, right? Now, it gives us a basis from which to understand the weird complications of why, for instance, Democrats and liberals might be outraged by the policy of family separation, and rightly so, but how did we get to it, and what is the process, however misunderstood it was, that led the Trump administration to interpret the existing rules to mean that either families had to be separated under law, or that there were no other options for whatever reason, or that, how should we put this? The additional confusion that arises from the fact that, our initial, if you're not, steeped in the history of this and legal proceedings, as I'm not, your initial response is, if the Trump administration, which is doing these terrible things, wants to get rid of the Flores agreement, it must be a great thing, this Flores agreement. Well, it's not particularly good, and it isn't particularly humane and doesn't lead to particularly good outcomes. And, of course, as we're constantly reminded, it's not just the Trump administration that has bungled handling immigration. It is true that a lot of blame can be placed on the Obama administration. However, to simply place that blame and say it exists, the end, without trying to put some context to it, like why would an administration that Obama supporters, even just nominal Obama supporters, would credit with infinitely more humanity than the Trump administration, why would they find themselves trying to do similar things or trying to justify similar goals with respect to migrants? And the answer is they hoped that it would make Republican critics who really did want to make cruelty to migrants a central part of their platform leave Democrats alone. And then we could argue about things like whether or not the Affordable Care Act was universal health care or not, and important things. And I mean, that is important. And argue about the fine points of how it might make it easier to afford to pay the private health care industry to take care of us, etc., as opposed to actually just simply giving us universal nationalized health care or single payer or whatever your preference is. We could focus on those fights instead. But yeah, why would an administration that likes to consider itself more humane do things that could be held up in fair comparison to things that are done by an awful administration? And the answer is we were looking to stave off awful administrations, to win elections and stay in control of the process such that we could try our best to come up with humane solutions. How did we do with it? Not particularly well. I guess it made us so uncomfortable that we thought, well, maybe just a little teeny bit of inhumanity, if it will satisfy the people who are true monsters, that we are bad enough that they should leave us alone. But I guess we're back to the same basic problem. How do you convince someone who's a true monster to honor the implicit understanding that if we compromise with you, then you need to leave us alone, because compromise is its own reward? Yes, the entire purpose of our due process and our political system and voting and yada yada, etc. It's all the good things that we love as Americans, supposedly, right? Obviously, that will convince you, look, we've made a good faith gesture to include some portion of your views in our policy, even though you're monstrous and terrible. Oh, you don't care? Oh, that's right, you're monstrous and terrible. You're not like us. Perhaps you can't be compromised with. Dang. Well, can't blame us for trying. We can blame you for trying. It's just that we don't have very many alternatives to trying that can get elected. That's where we are. Okay, we're back to hopelessness, despite Charles Pierce and Paula's attempt to let him cheer us up, I guess. It's a complicated thing. It's absolutely infuriating and intractable. However, I mean, the best you can do is parse it down to, well, I don't believe that this person would attempt to approach the question with humanity. And I do believe that this other person's administration would attempt, though they may very well fail, to approach the question with humanity, and would do so in a predictable manner, consistent to, in the most part, with what we like to call due process. And that makes it predictable, and that means you would be able to head off bad policy at the pass by constantly arguing, organizing, and acting against it. Whereas with the chaos agent, who's a true monster and also a racist to boot, it's not entirely certain that you're going to be able to convince them to do the right thing, even if it means showing them that they're entirely wrong in court, because, as we learned yesterday, they don't even particularly care what courts say, even if they are officers of that court. It's a bit of a difficult problem. It's a real pickle, isn't it? All right, time for us to take another break, catch our wind, I mean very literally at this point, and organize thoughts for our final segment of the day. These Tuesday gigs, all alone, it's a tough thing. I'm not kidding. Okay, let's see. By way of wrapping up for the segment, we can take some quick look around and see if there are some interesting suggestions for new topics, and indeed there are. I am behind on the music, but we'll jump out a little bit early this time. Uh-oh, I've got some breaking news. Let's see. Oh, look at this. Kate Sherrill has this news for us. I guess they finally tweaked it just enough. We were talking about their inability to get things right before the courts. What do we got? TikTok by Bloomberg. I didn't even realize they had such a thing. Says, just in, Trump's travel ban has been upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. We'll check in on that next. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yeah, we've just had 2 minutes, and we got a little extra music to fade out here. 2 minutes to review the situation, and there's not much to review. Bloomberg's brief blurb, and I mean it is just a blurb on the issue, simply says the U.S. Supreme Court upheld President Donald Trump's travel ban against a broad legal attack, giving him a legal and political victory, I guess to add to the end of the long string of defeats, on a controversy that helped define his presidency. The vote of 5-4, what do you know? Along ideological grounds, the court rejected contentions that Trump had exceeded his authority and violated the Constitution by targeting Muslims, which of course he did. But hey, if you get 5 together that say he didn't, then once again, I guess we'll bring back the old concept that I've been using for a long time, even since before radio days. It just goes to show that if you thought the Constitution forbade the recognition of rights in this country based on the religion of the person claiming the rights, then you were just pre-wrong and didn't know it. The truth is that, well, as we've learned 100 times over from Armando, whatever 5 Supreme Court justices say they want, no matter really why they say they want it, that just becomes the law. And if you understood the Constitution to mean something completely different all this time, well, I say you were pre-wrong. It's difficult to predict, though, when you are pre-wrong, because, of course, the whole concept depends on chaos theory, I guess, and just simply using your seat on the Supreme Court to get what you want, no matter what it is and how unfair it is or how poorly grounded. It doesn't matter. A poorly reasoned 5-4 decision stands just the same as a strongly reasoned 5-4 decision, or really, for that matter, a strongly reasoned 9-0 decision, although perhaps fewer people think their odds of overturning a 9-0 decision, whether strongly reasoned or otherwise, are just insurmountable. The odds against you are insurmountable, whereas a 5-4, I guess there's always a chance. But that's all it says right now. I'm sure there's more commentary on the way. Sam Stein, I noticed, shared an interesting tweet about this. I guess Mitch McConnell is very excited about this because, of course, the 5-4 decision, how did it happen? Obviously, one of the 5 would have been Neil Gorsuch, and Mitch McConnell regards the seating of Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court as his personal accomplishment, and so therefore he needs to take as much pride in it as possible. Sam Stein tweeting, therefore, for McConnell, or his team anyway, it is literally all about the win. Policy and social outcomes seem entirely secondary. For instance, here he is on the left in this tweet, a photo, 2 photos included, gloating about the travel ban decision. It is a tweet from Team Mitch that shows a picture of Gorsuch and McConnell shaking hands. I guess, I don't know exactly when they did that and whether that was at the time he was nominated or at the time of his confirmation. But can I get the picture back again? Control booth, can you bring that one back up and get rid of that text above it? All it is, is that it? All they did? A picture? Huh. So it's almost like trolling. They tweeted this out at 10:22 this morning, just a picture of the 2 of them shaking hands. And I guess that's the gloating about the win. And we got a 5-4 decision that really was probably it sounds like it was very poorly reasoned. And that's their reaction. Well, who cares? I put that bad 5th vote there, and so I win. On the right, as Sam describes it, is McConnell warning about it. So on the left, here he is gloating about the travel ban decision. Here he is on the right warning about it. It is his picture under the headline that reads, Senate Leader McConnell cautions Trump on travel ban, warns against, quote, religious tests. And, of course, the case sounds like it turned on just that, a religious test, the sort of thing that Mitch McConnell earlier warned about. But because he put the 5th vote there in order to get the religious test implemented, he considers it a win. So well done there. Absolutely. Well, you're entirely correct. So congrats, I guess, was Sam's follow-up to that one. Let's see. Any other commentary that we need to include in this? By the way, speaking of momentous decisions, Kate Sherrill's earlier contribution to the ideas bin here was Josh Putnam's tweet saying that Dems near decision on superdelegates, which just at this point seems like so far away from where we really need to be in terms of understanding what's happening in the country. But for some people, that will be a central issue. And look, some people have spent an awful long time on that issue, Armando included. And, not surprising that there would be people with their eye on that ball. Okay, let's see. Where were we today? Oh, Armando actually did have some suggestions along the way, but you know what doesn't happen anymore? I don't get pop-up notifications in Skype when people are sending messages in the same way that I used to. It was a lot easier to see when that was happening behind the scenes before. I wonder if that's a setting I can flip a switch on here. Let's see. Oh, well, he suggested a piece to discuss, and we might very well do that. I don't know if you're still available to discuss it, but his suggestion was, and it was always a good one, Mark Sumner's piece, The Civility Debate, in quotes, isn't about language, it's about power. That seems like it's pretty much up our alley and quite so. Let's see. And then, I guess, in discussing the various topics we've also touched on today, the motion to modify the Flores Agreement, as we discussed early on in our discussion of the Vox Explainer. The motion to modify is basically, we want to modify the decree so that we can detain families in ICE family centers. I guess, that's the quotes that denote that the phrase was the phrase they used, both ICE family centers for one thing, and we want to modify the decree probably wasn't their actual language, but let's take a look at this. All right. Let's see. I don't know if, Armando, if you are still listening and available, you can join in on the discussion, but I'm going to take up your suggestion that we take a look at Mark Sumner's piece that ran this morning on the civility debate, not being about language, but about power, and that seems obvious since I'm sure they would be just as upset with our incivility if it manifested itself physically, and perhaps more so. than just our verbal abuse, let's say, of Sarah Sanders. And by the way, the more that emerges about how she was asked to leave the Red Hen, the less her objection to it makes any sense. But that's not surprising for anybody. Here's what Mark has to say. The media demands for civility over the last 3 days are not just being unfairly applied in a wholly one-sided manner. Dirty hippies aren't allowed to comment on their betters. They are themselves a dangerous and unreasonable demand that is threatening the nation. Okay. It's not just that major media sources have settled into a routine where when Donald Trump insults someone, their first instinct is to repeat that insult. There is that, right? Or that they are constantly in search for a comment from the left, which, no matter how it's phrased, can be turned into the focus of some serious nose-lifted high dudgeon. Nose-lifted hyphen high dudgeon. Got it? Okay. Not nose-lifted high, although that happens too. It's not simply that while the right punches, the press plays stenographer, and when the left fights back, they declare fighting out of bounds. Though that does happen too. It's not even about the incredible spectacle of journalists who have personally been on the receiving end of both spit and thrown bottles while Trump rants about ending political correctness, suddenly chiding the left for refusing to be good little frogs while the water boils. He's disturbed today, I think, Mark is. It's that the demand being made for civility isn't about language at all. It's about throwing a ring of protection around the powerful. It's about pretending that people whose actions wreck millions of lives on a whim are cocooned from the consequences of their actions, not just because they have money and connections and resources, but because their power puts them on a different plane. The idea that politics represents some kind of insulating blanket, that someone should be able to take any action in the service of a political office, then stroll out into the street and be treated with cheery civility, giving no consequence to what they've done in their day job, is not just foolish, it's dangerous. That's not civility, that's royalty. And a good point there at that. And by the way, it reminded me very much of the old complaint from Republicans when you called them out well within the bounds of what is still considered civility. They simply said, well, now you're criminalizing politics. Okay, can't do that? Fine, forget the legal proceedings against you. We'll just scream at you that you suck and you should change your mind, or you should at the very least not be able to walk out among us as though we didn't notice or care what you were doing. All right. This isn't some theoretical thing. The arguments here are not about angels on pins or the health of unseen cats. There are children being taken away at the border who may never see their parents again. And there are parents out there who will absolutely never see their child again because he was gunned down for simply being black. And there are people out there whose lives are purposely being made worse simply because those people who feel like they deserve to rule from inside Washington and still go out to demand a good meal from the peasantry, find them handy objects of ridicule. Okay. The idea that political statements take place in some privileged space, a safe space for certain speech, interesting, and that pushing back outside the Beltway is wrong isn't just sickening, it's surrender. And by the way, yes, you can push back inside the Beltway too, as was the case with Kirstjen Nielsen and MXDC, right, and her jaunt out for Mexican food. This reminds me, by the way, along the way of, I guess it was it Maggie Haberman who was retweeting was it from the Washington Post op-ed? I mean, it should be no surprise to you, of course, that Maggie Haberman was tweeting on the civility issue and saying, of course, that all of this pushback from people was, somehow horrific and upsetting and out of bounds. And let's see, I can't recall exactly what it was and how she put it. Should probably scroll back. Well, if it's not immediately going to present itself, there's the Paul Begala one, then I guess we'll return. Oh, there it is. Yes, this one, Mark's paragraph reminded me of this. She was quoting from the Washington Post opinion piece on this. Those who are insisting that we are in a special moment, justifying incivility, should think for a moment how many Americans might find their own special moment. In other words, watch out. This could be a slippery slope. If it's up to everyone else to determine when the moment arrives in which incivility is justified, why, then it's chaos. But of course, that was an awfully privileged thing to say in the first place. My own response to it there was, well, they better not find out they better not find that special moment a few minutes before the start of a professional football game and take a knee uncivilly in order to protest it, because by then, of course, you've gone too far. In other words, those who are insisting we're at a special moment justifying incivility, and it's not even the case necessarily that certainly the protesters at the NFL games aren't saying, well, this justifies incivility, because what they're doing isn't uncivil. But, hello, the past couple of years have largely been marked by a widespread national protest that argues that, yeah, getting shot and killed arbitrarily on your way to and from local destinations in your own neighborhood for no reason other than, I don't know, you're scary because you're black, maybe that does justify some pushback. I mean, the idea that we're only just now because Kirsten Nielsen, because Sarah Sanders, that white people are involved in the pushback on this. Oh my goodness! Now but this erases like the entire history of the Black Lives Matter movement. It pushes it aside entirely. What's really important here is what happened at this Mexican restaurant in the Red Hen, not the murders going on in the streets that police are gunning people down for no reason whatsoever, or certainly no good reason. And we're at a special moment. We've been there for a long time. It's just not the moment you cared about. That's really kind of an incredible miss on her part. But she's busy. I don't know what else to say about this woman at this point. All right. Moving on, though, back with Mark Sumner here. And he had some really... I love that observation about... I'm going to repeat it. The idea that politics represents some kind of insulating blanket. You can't criminalize politics. You can't even protest politics anymore. That someone should be able to take any action in the service of a political office, then stroll out into the street and be treated with cheery civility. Blah, 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 blah. It's not civility. That's royalty. In other words, I just did this thing. Now give me a nice meal. And really, honestly, I don't really know why we're not simply saying that what happened here was that Sarah Sanders and Kirsten Nielsen felt they should not only be entitled to a good meal, but basically we should just, at this point, why not lie? If they're going to get out there and say, well, Democrats want open borders. They love when criminals kill people in this country when they came from Mexico. Really? All right. Well, then you were just stealing food. You feel like you're entitled to eat at any restaurant you want, whenever you want to, for free. What? That's not true. You're totally distorting what happened here. Oh, am I? Is that a problem? All right. Well, why get bogged down in those details? But I'm just throwing that out there. Back to Mark Sumner, who's considered things a little more carefully than I have, and still comes up with a pretty good expression for it and an elegant solution. For many of the journalists engaged in this latest round of finger-waving, a large part of the argument is about who they value. They value those people they see, that they meet, that they talk with every day. And it's hard. It's a human condition. You're going to want to do that. Those people that they interview and quote are real people, worthy of nice things, even when they don't say nice things. And the people who don't have power, the people whose only appearance on television is as a literal face in the crowd, are not valued, not worthy, not real. It's why Sarah Sanders can lie directly to their faces every day and treat them like a class of unruly third graders, and they'll still moan in sympathy when Sanders is featured in a punchline. Not a punch, but a punch line. Because jokes hurt. Not like the policies that Sanders is promoting that only take food and medicine from those who need it and pump pollution into the air and water to the tune of 80,000 American lives lost. Don't forget about that angle. That tendency to place more import on those around you is only human. See, I knew he would agree with me eventually about what humans are. But the media's tendency to demand it is part of protecting the power structure. When senators and congressmen wax lyrical over the magic age of civility past, even that is just another way of saying, when we once went to our country clubs together, free of our lessers, and the press coddled us even more. The press would be happier if Americans storming the castle would limit their efforts to the occasional neatly proscribed march with colorful signs and a permit. The press is going to continue to be disappointed in us if we're lucky. And I think a nice call to arms, even though that the opening salvo of the show was about, I guess, the upcoming neatly arranged, neatly proscribed march that will have colorful signs and a permit. And, well, that's true. And there's a place for that, too. But as I keep reminding you on Twitter and here on the show, hey, I'll do you one better. I'll go back to an even older age of civility, that of the founders. And for the founders, why, tar and feathers was good enough for the founders. And of course, there were those who would say, no, by God, we're against that as well. And that's why we have framed this Constitution, yada, 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 et cetera, et cetera. But look, our heroes are imperfect. And tar and feathers was a preferred outcome in their lifetime. And they didn't take action and principled stands against it and lay their lives down in the street to prevent it from happening. And so we won't either. Just saying. If it's good enough for them, then something, something, something. I really don't want to make the rest of this argument. I like the idea of talking about tar and feathers with those guys. Okay, let's see. Moving on to a couple of shorter, smarter, funner daily news pieces that we can use to wrap up the show. An interesting piece here, grabbed rather at random from the New York Times. Remember the whole, hey, taxes suck, and if we just put them on a postcard, everything will be fine. Well, they really got hung up on that as a bumper sticker, and so they want their postcard. And guess what? It's out. And guess what? It sucks, and it's backwards and upside down and no better than any other tax form. Jim Tankersley, writing for the New York Times here, the new tax form is postcard size. Yes, they made it. But more complicated than ever. And recall that the point of making it postcard size wasn't to save on mailing costs, although, that'd be nice, but to simplify things. We're going to make the tax system so simple that a comprehensive accounting for your income and obligation to the federal government as a citizen can be summarized on a postcard. It will be, this is how much you make, this is the percentage you owe, send it in. In other words, the flattest possible tax. But guess what? They couldn't bring themselves to do it. A new version of the 1040 income tax form set for release this week omits some popular deductions and requires several worksheets for many taxpayers to complete. So that's basically what they did. The new thing is postcard sized, but, well, one, they just reduced the type, and two, they simply said, oh, by the way, there's lots of other vital information that you absolutely have to report. It just doesn't fit on this postcard. So send some supplemental documentation. That doesn't count. The Trump administration's new postcard, and that's in quotes, tax form must still be mailed in an envelope. So you still don't save on the mailing costs. There you go. It has to be mailed in an envelope, of course, because what would be the well, not the point, but necessary. What would be your chief objection, let's say, to a postcard tax form? And the answer is, on a postcard with no privacy whatsoever, because it's out there on a postcard. Can people just read postcards in passing? Yes, you bet. That's what postcards are all about. Don't put your password on a postcard, I guess. Would you fill out a postcard that was to go through the mail system that said your name, address, social security number, how much money you make, from what source it comes, and how much you now think you owe in taxes, and just mail that in a postcard without any sort of privacy protection whatsoever? Of course not. It's amazing that nobody ever seemed to interested in saying so until just now. And so, now, the main idea of putting it on a postcard wasn't to save on mailing costs, but that was at least out there. But now that's out the window. I forgot about that. So you still have to mail it in an envelope. unless, of course, you want your neighbors to see your Social Security number. It will save a little bit of time for some taxpayers, but could add pages more paperwork for millions of others. A draft copy of the new version of the standard 1040 income tax form, obtained by the New York Times, shows the administration has succeeded in its goal of shrinking the form that most Americans send to the Internal Revenue Service every year. The new form eliminates more than half of the 78 line items from the previous form, reducing it from 2 full pages of text to 1 double-sided half page, also known as 1 whole page. But okay. Check out the old form and the new draft form, and there are pictures of them included here. Smaller is not necessarily simpler, though. The new form omits a variety of popular deductions, including those for student loan interest and teaching supplies, forcing taxpayers to search for them and tally them up on one of 6 accompanying worksheets. It's not that those deductions are gone, it's that you have to fill out a different bunch of postcards in order to claim them. It does the same for business income, capital gains, and several other forms of income. It includes a dedicated line for the expanded child tax credit, but not one for child care expenses. Ivanka, I'll get you for this. Like we said, there are a lot of worksheets. Again, a draft version, and they include a bunch of those worksheets here. Administration officials have said they will unveil the new form this week. A person with knowledge of the new form said on Monday that it was meant to replace not just the 1040, but also the 1040A, short form, and the 1040EZ, for filers without any dependents. The new form will be a postcard, as we've promised, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said last week, and hard-working taxpayers won't have to spend nearly as much time filling out their taxes. Well, they will. They'll just have to do it on different pieces of paper. While the new tax law did not drastically simplify the individual tax code, millions of taxpayers could save a bit of time on their filings this year by skipping itemized deductions and claiming the newly expanded standard deduction instead. This assumes taxpayers know right away whether that's the smartest course for them. If they don't, they'll need to take the time to add up itemized deductions anyway and then compare it with the standard deduction. So in other words, for a lot of people, you will spend all the time you used to spend adding up your deductions and then look at it and say, oh, that was a waste of time. I should take the standard deduction after all, and I shouldn't have done all of this hunting for receipts and calculator adding. So, okay. Anyway, the rest of the article is actually more about tax policy than anything else, and illustrated with a picture of President Trump planting an unwanted kiss on, okay, maybe this isn't so bad, the tax plan postcard during a meeting in 2017. So when they said we're going to get it down to a postcard, he was so moved, he kissed it. He didn't even ask, he just moved in, and then he bought some furniture for the postcard and grabbed it by, I don't know exactly what you would do to a postcard, but naturally he had to do that. He loves to fondle flags and kiss postcards, and I suppose we should count that as an improvement more than anything else. I mean, what else are we going to do? So there you go. More inappropriate behavior, this time with inanimate objects. And he's your president, supposedly. I don't know what you're supposed to do with that, but there you have it. Okay. Time to wrap things up on another rather disjointed episode of the Kagro in the Morning Show. And if you're worried about getting the hard news of the day, or even some of the soft news for that matter, you can stay tuned for Justice Putnam's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. That coming up next, and why not take a peek at what's coming up and give some thought to what we can do with the rest of the week as well as we move into Wednesday. All right, I got time for the whole thing here if I start now. The West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, now open. And, of course, as you know, follows our show every day. And if you find yourself busy after our show, there's always the podcasts. I encourage you to take a look for those. Starting off in the Bistro Cafe, calling Stephen Miller a white nationalist is not impolite. It's a fact. But guess what? It doesn't matter to the news media anyway. They don't want you to be that impolite to the man. On the rest of, and I understand that they're protesting these days outside of his apartment, which is somehow described as an elite apartment building, and maybe that's accurate, maybe it's not. It just seems like a weird construction. All right, Stephen Miller out of the way. Right on the rest of the menu, infamous white supremacist Mike Enoch Pinovich. Really, that's actually his name, and he's willing to say so. He doesn't want you to know who his lawyer is. That's what he's afraid of. That's what he's hiding from you. Okay, well, that's intriguing. You can tune in to find out exactly why that is and maybe who the lawyer is anyway. Congresswoman Barbara Lee calls for an investigation into Sarah Sanders' attack on the Red Hen restaurant. It is, of course, a violation of ethics rules to use your private or your public account that way. And 4 incumbent Democrats join calls to abolish ICE. That was some serious Overton window moving, by the way. And of course, you'll find out all about that if you follow the movement online and on Twitter as well. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. After the break, they move to the chef's table where Trump's tariffs force companies to rework supply chains that are better suited for an era of stable, open trade policy. Everybody's got to redesign their supply chains in order to comply with his haphazard, ad hoc, chaos-creating tariffs. Very interesting. And Saudi Arabia, can you believe it, sent a misleading email, their emails, to Congress after bombing a cholera treatment facility run by Doctors Without Borders. And guess where that must have happened? I suppose that happened in Yemen. And all that and more on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam coming up next.
From Daily Co's Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Yes, thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow being Wednesday, of course, we'll have Greg Dworkin with us to set us on a non-chaotic path in gathering up the news. Plus, Joan McCarter to set us on a path for gathering up the non-chaotic coverage of Capitol Hill, punditry, and happenings as well. So, from top to bottom, organization.